Hello, and welcome to another episode of the MBN Iran podcast. And with me today are my colleagues Joe Khouly, who is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for MBN, and Rami Al-Amin, a long-standing respected journalist at MBN. And both of them, I've asked them to come on today to talk about one of the biggest topics that we think about when we talk about Iran and the war, and that is actually Lebanon. We've gone through so many things involving Lebanon in this war. Sometimes it's thought of as a sideshow, but sometimes you think that actually it's the main show. It's where it's become kinetic, it's on the ground, uh, and it's not even a neighboring country to Iran, but we've had ceasefires announced. We've had Israel and the Lebanese government and ceasefires and more ceasefires, and then ceasefires broken. And I want to start with that. Rami, do you want to just catch us up? We talked about this a few days ago and how it's come to the center, and there's lots going on with Hezbollah. And do you want to just tell us your take on where we stand now?
Well, actually, Andres, Hezbollah is clearly giving the wheel for IRGC in Lebanon. So they are not acting uh, uh, by themselves. They are more linked now to IRGC. If you remember when the rockets were fired to on Israel on March 12th, 2nd, I think. Hezbollah own analysts and even a former minister of Hezbollah initially claimed that these rockets were suspicious and whoever fired these rockets is working for Israel. Later, they were surprised by the official statement by Hezbollah, uh, and they changed their narratives. In reality, it was the IRGC that issued that statement, and they dragged, uh, from my point of view, Hezbollah to this war again because it benefits their position in this war between them and the US and Israel. So basically, Lebanon now is in a position of paying a heavy price in this war, uh, simply to serve the Iranian regime and the regional interest of this regime.
So you're saying that the shots are really being called from Tehran, that Tehran is instructing Hezbollah directly what to do, whether to accept the ceasefire or not, and so on.
Yes, we witnessed that with what Naim Qasim said in his appearance, his last appearance. He clearly declined the ceasefire, so-called ceasefire. It's not a ceasefire. We know that the Israelis are not complying with any ceasefire now. This is another problem, but in the same time, the Hezbollah is clearly now like obeying to the IRGC more than the Lebanese dynamics, the interior dynamics, and this is, in my point of view, is very dangerous. So, as you said, as you're trying to ask about, we are now hearing Tehran's voice in Beirut, not Hezbollah's voice. Uh, uh, I think Iran is now running everything, and uh, even if you remember when this government decided or decided to expel the Iranian ambassador in Beirut, he simply refused to leave. Hezbollah and Amal told him not to leave, and let's not forget as well that when the pager operation explosions happened in Lebanon in 2024, the Iranian ambassador was wounded because he had one of these pagers. So clearly, the operation, the Iranian embassy is a part of the interior operation of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And now it's more clearly that, as I said before, the Iranian are taking the wheel and they are the main player now in Lebanon.
That's a good point about the pager. And just one more thing about this relationship between Hezbollah and Tehran. How has it changed over time? Is this unprecedented, this level of control from Tehran, or has it ever been like this before, where it was literally Tehran deciding on behalf of Hezbollah?
I'm not sure if it was like that before. I think Hassan Nasrallah played a role in the, let's say, Lebanization of Hezbollah. He was trying to have a narrative more Lebanese in that term. After the killing of Hassan Nasrallah now, I think the situation returned to being entirely Iranian.
Got it. Well, speaking of relations between, who's calling the shots and from where, I want to turn to you, Joe, and ask you, as you know, and you've so well reported in recent times, most recently we had the expletive-laden phone call from President Trump with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So can you walk us through a little bit about the background to that and frankly, who's calling the shots there and who is Washington negotiating with and calling ceasefires with? Who are they talking to?
Let's first go back to important languages being used. On June 3rd, the State Department, after hosting the trilateral or bilateral meetings between Israelis, Lebanese, and the Americans in the Washington, they released a joint statement, and they used and called that there's a need for a ceasefire. But if you read the language, and we did a video explaining this, because unfortunately, what we are witnessing right now in the media landscape, especially in the Middle East, it's a division between people saying, well, this is not really a ceasefire because we are witnessing what's happening. There are violations from both sides. And others are celebrating that at least there are talks and there is some sort of governance over the decision of what Lebanon wants to do without Iran. And we heard what the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, said with Christian Amanpour on CNN, that Lebanon calls the shot. It's not your people, it's not your country. That's why I want to go back to see that there's a division between people who celebrate that statement and the ceasefire and people who are calling it really not a ceasefire. So it's conditional. The ceasefire is conditional on a complete cessation of Hezbollah fire and evacuation from south of the Litani. Let's remember that Hezbollah rejected it 24 hours later. If Hezbollah rejected it, it means that Iran either gave the orders or Iran wants Hezbollah to reject it. So we're not in a ceasefire. We're in a framework that Lebanon also agreed. Israel is selling it. Trump wants to implement it. Lebanon is trying to implement, and Hezbollah doesn't accept. So right now, the next benchmark is the June 22nd talks. Right now, as of today, there was skepticism, even in Lebanon, on how the shape of these talks are going to happen given the circumstances. So if Hezbollah shows up, the framework might have some legs. If they don't, then Washington whole thesis would be hard to implement. And that's what we mentioned also on Monday with the MBN agenda. Going back to your question, Trump really wants this to work. Trump wants to have a deal with Iran. That's why we heard in the media this profanity language with the phone calls between Trump and Netanyahu that has been reported on many U.S. Mainstream networks and Israeli networks. To go back to what Rami also said, like Iran made Lebanon non-negotiable. One of the most overlooked, I think, moves in the past month is the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who said any U.S.-Iran ceasefire is a ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon. So there is this still division between what Washington wants, no link, but separation between Iran and Lebanon. And what we mentioned and what we have seen in the past few days, over the past weekend, Israel killing 3 generals from the Lebanese armed forces, more attacks on the southern part of Beirut, what we call the Dahye. So the series of events is actually proving that Lebanon is tied because Iran wants to tie it. Why? I think I would leave that for you, Anders, because you might understand and have more perspective of what really Iran wants. But it's a violation on one front. It's a violation on the ceasefire on all fronts. Trump wants the negotiation or to negotiate the US-Iran track separately again from Lebanon. Iran is saying no. There are reasons for that. I'm not sure if they have some strength or leverage through the Strait of Hormuz, but that binding creates the actual gridlock. We're not moving. It's been like 4 months now for the war. Trump wants a deal. I'm not sure if Iran wants a deal, and not sure how this deal would take a shape. Israel wants Hezbollah disarmed. Hezbollah is answering to Iran. Iran is saying, if you touch Hezbollah, you violate the broader deal. So the real negotiation is not, I think, in the trilateral talks in Washington. It's with Tehran, and Tehran is making those conditions harder, not easier. Why? What do you think?
Well, as we just passed the 100-day mark in this war, and one of the things, as we all know, is how, despite the fact that it hasn't been an all-out, full-scale war of the type that we all know from history, land, ground invasions, and so on, it was a pretty light touch kinetic war until the ceasefire, if we can still call it that, took hold. But what's interesting to watch is that the initial expectations really have shifted. As we all know, the Strait of Hormuz is suddenly, it's Iran's plaything, which it could have been a long time before. And they hold so many cards. And basically they can sit there in Tehran. The fact that they can decide that they want the 2 issues, well, multiple issues, whether they want Lebanon to be part of it, they can basically dictate that. And that's one of the difficult things I think we're looking at, is that so no one else wants to connect the 2, but they do. And there we are. And it's sort of, if I want to put it kind of symbolically, it's a remote operation in a sense, kind of like the pagers were, but in a different way. It's almost like diplomatic pagers. I mean, they can just turn things on and off at will. And it's fascinating to watch how many things now. I mean, the fact that you have Donald Trump shouting at Benjamin Netanyahu and using curse words and so on, all this stuff is unprecedented. And the fact that Israel's interests and the US's interests, they're generally aligned, but of course Lebanon borders on Israel and they have their own considerations and so on. And Tehran can just sit back in a sense and watch. Right? I
And
mean, they
also
can sit there
there
and
is a
watch.
gap, Andres, to go back to what the power play in terms of the Shia party in Lebanon, which Rami talked about, and he can expand more. But let's remember that Secretary Rubio's idea to build or give assistance or help Lebanon, and specifically the Lebanese armed forces, is to build an elite Lebanese armed forces unit that its job would be to disarm Hezbollah. So Israel does not have to. That's what he said. And that's rationale. Okay. I mean, Lebanon would take care of this. I'm not sure if it happened similarly in the REA in Ireland, but it took 30 years to disarm those groups, even though back then all parties agreed. So that's rationale, yes, but here's what nobody in Washington or in Lebanon or when we think of these things is talking about. But it's been discussed right now. Hezbollah has, Rami, correct me if I were wrong, more than 30,000 armed fighters now, or 40,000 fighters. And whatever the number is, those fighters are paid by Iran. And it's also, Hezbollah, a political party with cabinet seats in the government. And we have to remember that it's a service provider to 1.2 million Lebanese Shia. So if you take their weapons without an economic exit ramp or exit help, you start a civil war. And now I had an interview with Congressman Michael Baumgartner yesterday, and we discussed this, and there's no negation that there is fear. There's a looming fear right now between the division of opinions in Lebanon about what is right and what is wrong. More importantly, how the implementation of a ceasefire is right or wrong. There's a huge division between how Lebanese people are seeing it. So I think there is that fear right now. And I think Tom Barak, the US envoy, understood this. That's why his old plan was link Gulf reconstruction funding to the disarmament of Hezbollah. So you give people at least a reason to give up their guns. Right now, that piece is missing, and without it, the vetted Lebanese armed forces unit that would disarm Hezbollah could fracture Lebanon faster than it would unify it. And right now, there's no unifying vision or implementation to what is the next step, even against the government and even against the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun.
So to build on all of this, and it's interesting, again, sort of coupling, right? Coupling reconstruction, coupling and splitting. So Rami, you and I discussed last week the latest altercations, if you will, between Hezbollah and Amal. What's going on there? Are they repeating history? Because you think that they're aligned, and we know they haven't always been. How are their interests different? What's happening? How is it coming apart?
Yeah, an incident happened in Baysariye. It's a village in South Lebanon between the two parties. Let's be clear, it's not a large scale military confrontation. It's kind of very small local street fight, let's say. But this small incident brings back the huge history of fear between these two parties. To show you how deep the trauma between these two parties historically is, we have to look at the late 80s. The two groups fought a brutal civil war called the War of the Brothers. Back then, more than 2,500 people died, and it literally turned families against each other. So what Joe is talking about in terms of fears from a civil war, it could be also the case between Shia themselves. And let me tell you a story that can reflect how deep and critical was that war, because the late leader of Hezbollah, the famous Hassan Nasrallah, was actually a member of Harakat Amal, of the Amal movement, when he was young. In 1982, he broke away from Amal to help founding Hezbollah. When this war, the war of brothers, started between the two groups, Hassan Nasrallah was a top commander in Hezbollah, but his brother stayed with Amal, and he was like a high-level commander by then. So two real brothers from the same family leading opposite side in this bloody war. This is why the Shia community is still terrified of any clashes today between Amal and Hezbollah. And for more like context, this political split between those two parties that are now very allied started in 1980, before the founding of Hezbollah. Nabih Berri appeared of having this kind of pragmatic view to the role of Shia in the Lebanese politics. This was when he became the leader of Amal after Hussein al-Husseini and after the kidnapping of Musa al-Sadr. And the dynamics by then, it's kind of very related to Iran as well. Musa al-Sadr was sent to Lebanon by the Shah, and Hezbollah is a revolutionary Iranian product. So this clash is between the Iran of the Shah and the Iran of the revolution in the late 80s. And there's a nuance as well here. Berri back then took a strong position against the PLO in South Lebanon. And he demanded that the Lebanese army should deploy to South Lebanon and take control of the borders. And this is exactly today what the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, is asking for. So Berri has this point in the 80s, but now he's clearly aligned with Hezbollah, but still Berri can play a role of a bridge between Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. He can talk to Joseph Aoun, he can talk to Hezbollah, he can talk to the Americans and the Iranian as well, and he can talk to the Israelis. We saw that Ali Hamdan, a senior advisor of Nabih Berri, contacted Barak Ravid, the Israeli journalist, lately, and he kind of like transmitted a message from Nabih Berri to the Israelis. So Berri can talk as well to the Israelis directly, and that means he can agree to a direct negotiation with the Israelis. So this... Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just ask you about Nabih Berri, because I think he's like 88 years old. More power to him for wanting to get involved in trying to solve this. I'm curious, just as an aside, do you think that the eventual generational change, I mean, when he's no longer active, shall we say, if that's going to change the dynamics on the ground?
The Lebanese Shia have this. They said, I don't know how to translate this to English. Joe, help me. They says that يا ويلنا من بعدك لنبيه بري,
which means in a way, like, how can we really exist after you?
after
right?
you. Yeah. So because if he dies, it will be a huge problem for the Shia community. He's the only point of contact between the Shia now and the world, even with the Americans. And we know that this administration put some sanctions on people around Berri. They are trying to push him away from Hezbollah. And I don't know if that could work or not, but they are trying to use the stick, not the carrot, with him this time, because maybe by pressuring him by sanctions, he can shift a little bit away from Hezbollah. And we saw that After these sanctions, he contacted Barak Ravid, and he was more active in this negotiations.
Uh, just quickly, you had the Al-Qard al-Hassan investigation that you did. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Money, weapons, and so on?
Well, there was the Al-Akhbar newspaper in Lebanon. It's a newspaper aligned with Hezbollah. Said that Hezbollah succeeded uh, uh, to have $1.2 billion in the last year. So that means that their financial situation still stand, and they are most probably they are still smuggling money, even with all what is implemented in the airport or the port from the Lebanese government. And I'm still working on that story, but most probably the smuggles come from Istanbul through Iran, Iran, Istanbul, Beirut, because all the planes coming from Tehran or from Iraq are basically monitored in the airport. And there is a lot of talks in Israeli media that the Turkish are playing a role in letting Hezbollah get these huge amount of money, because their financial situation before the war was they got like around 800 million, 900 millions. Now they are getting 1.2 billion uh, in the middle of the war.
I have to say that we need to look at this also in a regional lens, because the hardest question, can we disarm Hezbollah? Can you disarm Hezbollah while Iran remain in the region? So the answer that really a lot of people and no one will say out loud is no, not easily. Hezbollah rearms. But here's the thing that people should know about. Trump says he wants a deal with Iran, no, or one way or another, right? So if the United States and Iran find an agreement that includes Iran standing down support for Hezbollah, not just in Lebanon, but across the region, then I think the Lebanese armed forces has space to move. Then the government of Lebanon, the Lebanese president, would be able to implement talks in a free way or a free will. Then the money flows. Then the disarmament becomes possible. Until that happens, everything we're doing in these trilateral talks in Washington is negotiating the terms of a temporary ceasefire, not peace, not a ceasefire that everyone, when we hear the word ceasefire, we think of one thing. Unfortunately, that is not it. And people who consume the news, they need to be also aware that the word ceasefire in these terms doesn't mean a cessation of clashes or the war. It means a framework, not building a durable solution. So the real deadline, unfortunately, and I'm going to say it before June 22nd, and we can come back to this episode, the real deadline isn't June 22nd with the next round of negotiation and talks between Israelis and Lebanese. It's whatever date Iran and Washington, Iran and Trump either make a deal or don't. That is the deadline.
I think that's very well put. And I'm reminded, Joe, with your program, The Diplomat, and your focus on language and the language of diplomacy, you're underscoring quite rightly how important it is. We call it a ceasefire. It's a kind of easy to use term, but I think it, as you said, in language, policy can follow from language. And if we overuse the word ceasefire when it's not really the case, then people can make some
But
policy
also in
mistakes.
policy making, it's not, we're not writing a novel. We're not talking in just English. In policy, the details of of each framework and how each word is put. What is the sentence before it? What is the sentence after it? What is the condition of the terms to achieve something is what's most important. The most important thing is not just throwing words on people and making people get opinions and division of what that means, unfortunately. So I think, again, everyone needs to understand that Trump wants a deal. Therefore, his phone call that has been reported on multiple U.S. news outlets and Israeli news outlets, he had and used profanity language with Netanyahu and against what's happening because he wants a deal. So therefore, the deadline is not what happens in Washington at the State Department between Israel and Lebanon. Again, it is whenever, whatever Iran and Trump agrees to make a deal. That is the deadline.
But do you think, Joe, I mean, the big question is Bibi Netanyahu now, because even after this phone call, Netanyahu retaliated to the uh, Iranian missiles, and he didn't like agreed with Trump on not to respond. So I'm curious to hear your point of view about
I
this.
think it's not a point of view. It's me trying to see the statements that are being put out there. Trump after that said, "Okay, fine, you fired, let's stop." Right? Let's get one level deeper. We always say there's extremists in every country and every government, and everyone sees the statements by Ben Gvir or Smotrich as extremist. To know what that means, we need to understand that there is an election that's going to happen in Israel. And I was talking to an Israeli friend of mine who's really higher up in the UN. And he was saying that it's a difficult call for Netanyahu right now and the extremists in the government. Because whatever decision that's going to happen on the ground, it's going to affect Netanyahu's coalition in the government and his presence or his term or his time in the government. And Israelis are afraid from that higher up position, Israeli at the United Nations. There is fear right now that also the election might not happen because the extremists, whether it's Ben Gvir or others, would push Netanyahu, and Netanyahu would play that game that we would have a war, and therefore we're not going to have an election. So when that's the difficult part of seeing things or asking a question about one situation, because unfortunately everything is tied. Everything is tied to domestic politics and regional politics. The regional politics we talked about, Trump, Iran making a deal or not, that is the deadline. Also, what makes Israel or Netanyahu listen to Trump or not listen to Trump, it's a very tough call because, as we heard, Trump maybe is losing that patience, if we're gonna call or make an interpretation of that profanity phone call. So the elections in Israel also would move the needle either way. And to add more, Ben Gvir went farther from the war because they said that the war isn't probably then doing the objectives that they wanted faster. He called for the abduction of Lebanese kids and Lebanese women. So the war is not just only that, there's also a media war. So I would want to end, probably because we're toward the end of this episode, to say that there are rumors right now from Lebanon that Washington is reducing the funds for the Lebanese armed forces. And right now it's circulating. You've probably heard that the Trump administration is cutting Lebanon aid from 200 probably million to 30 million. It's circulating. It starts to circulate in Lebanon. That's directionally accurate but misleading. And it matters for our credibility. So what actually happened here is that the FY 2027 or the fiscal year 2027 budget request proposes 36 million via a counter-ISIS fund Lebanon has never tapped before. Lebanon never tapped that fund. But Congress just released a $230 million last October. So the real story isn't a cut from 20 million to 30 million. It's that Washington is trying to tie future aid to the Lebanese armed forces to disarmament. That is the actual leverage play.
I think that's a brilliant conclusion to what we've been talking about. It's kind of who's even at the table, who's talking to whom, which issues are even on the table. Basically, everything is a variable. And as you highlighted about the election, and this is something to bear in mind, the U.S. has its midterm elections in November. The Israeli elections are supposed to happen by, I believe, October 27th. They may be moved up earlier, but as you're saying, maybe conditions will change even that date. A lot up in the air. Of course, Iran doesn't really have true elections, so that's not a variable. But other than that, it's all a variable, and it's just stunning which countries are on the table, who's at the table. It's endless. And as you said, we may have news before June 22nd. And as you suggested, Joe, I'd like to revisit all this before June 22nd or on the day and see, well, who's talking to whom, who's decided. It's all up in the air, as we know. And I want to thank you both, Rami Al-Amin, Joe Khawli, both for your brilliant insights into what's going on and helping make sense of something that's really hard to make sense of. Thank you.